You know, some stories, they're literally buried for thousands of years, just waiting for science to finally give them a voice. And today, we're going to unwrap a big one. A 3,500-year-old mystery that starts with a silent, terrifying scream. So, who was she?
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1935. We're in Deir el-Bahari, Egypt. Imagine archaeologists deep inside this ancient site. They're expecting to find treasure, history, but what they find instead is, well, it's both fascinating and really, really unsettling.
So they uncover this mummy, and it's like nothing they've ever seen before. Her face is just twisted. Her mouth is stuck wide open, like she's locked in this final silent scream. It's so shocking that right then and there she gets a nickname, the Screaming Woman.
And for decades, that's what everyone wanted to know. Who was she? And maybe more importantly, what could have possibly happened to her to make her die screaming? Those are the exact questions we're going to dive into right now.
All right, so with any mystery, where do you start? You start with the clues, right? And in the case of the Screaming Woman, it was modern science that finally gave us the tools to piece her story together.
And right away, the findings were kind of strange, a real puzzle. On one hand, she was clearly important. I mean, she was about 48, buried with a wig, a couple of fancy scarab rings, and she was embalmed with the good stuff, expensive, imported juniper and frankincense. But here's the weird part. The embalmers skipped the usual incision they make, and yet she was still amazingly well preserved. So yeah, the clues were definitely pointing to something unusual.
So what about that scream? Well, a researcher named Dr. Sahar Salim, she's a professor of radiology, took a close look. And her theory was powerful. She suggested the scream wasn't something the embalmers did. No, it was a direct result of the way she died. And the reason for it? A really specific phenomenon called a cadaveric spasm. Cadaveric spasm, what is that? Well, it's this super rare thing where a person's muscles lock up instantly at the moment of death. It's usually tied to really violent or sudden deaths, under extreme stress. It literally freezes the body's last action. So think about what that means. Her scream probably wasn't just some accident of the mummification process. It was very likely the real, genuine expression on her face in her last agonizing moments.
Okay, so we have a good idea of how she died. That's a huge piece of the puzzle. But to really understand who she was, scientists needed to see her as a person, not just a mummy with a terrifying expression. They needed to see her face. And this is where today's technology is just amazing. Back in the day, you'd have to unwrap the mummy, probably damaging it, but not anymore. They used CT scanners to create a perfect digital 3D model of her skull without even touching the wrappings. It's incredible. It gave them the blueprint for her face, and the 3,500-year-old mummy stayed completely preserved.
So how do you go from a skull to a face? Well, they used a really established technique called the Manchester method. First, you have that 3D skull model we just talked about. Then they place these little pegs on it to mark how thick the tissue would have been in different spots. From there, an artist gets to work, painstakingly sculpting every single facial muscle, one by one, right onto the skull. And finally, they add the skin layer over the top. It's this perfect mix of hard science and incredible artistry.
And listen, this isn't just some artist's best guess. The method is incredibly accurate. An expert in the field, Caroline Wilkinson, points out that they've been able to compare reconstructions like this to actual portraits painted on mummies, and they match up. So this technique has a solid track record. It really works.
So the science is solid, the skull model is ready, and the team was about to do something incredible. They were finally going to meet the person behind the scream.
The artist leading the project, a guy named Pharaoh Ramesses, actually made two versions of her face. The first one is what you'd call the objective version. It's in grayscale, eyes closed. It's the pure science, based only on the skull and the data. But then he made a second, subjective version. This one's in full color with her wig, and it includes some artistic interpretation for things like skin tone based on what we know about the period. And Ramesses explained his process, saying it's kind of a hybrid approach. He takes the traditional, old-school forensic art techniques and mixes them with super modern data from CT scans of living people. It's this blend of old and new that really brings the face to life.
All right, so this is it. For 3,500 years, this woman has been defined by her agonizing death. But now, that scream is about to be replaced by a human face. A real presence brought back into the light.
And here she is. This is the face of the Screaming Woman. You can see she has these really strong, distinct features. And her expression, it's so calm, serene even. For the first time in millennia, we're not seeing her torment, we're seeing her. Her face, finally, is at peace.
Now this whole process is just incredible, right? But what does the future hold? Well, the next step in seeing the past might not involve clay and sculpting tools at all. It might be all about algorithms and AI. There's new research coming out that's exploring a totally different method, using generative AI. The idea is to train an AI to reconstruct a face, but instead of needing a fancy, expensive 3D CT scan, it could potentially do it from a much simpler 2D X-ray. When you put them side by side, the difference is huge. The traditional method needs those 3D scans and the hands-on skill of an expert artist. This new AI idea, though, it could work with simple 2D X-rays and automate the whole thing. The AI basically learns how to turn a skull into a face. It's a massive shift from human artistry to machine learning.
And the folks working on this AI are pretty optimistic. They think it could be a really powerful new tool for forensics, making this kind of reconstruction way faster and more accessible to everyone. So all this technology, whether it's clay or computer code, it makes you wonder, why do we do it? Why go to all this trouble to bring back these faces from so long ago? What are we hoping to find?
Well, I think the answer really comes down to one word: connection. There was another case where a different ancient Egyptian man's face was reconstructed, and when they shared it online, the reaction from people in Egypt today was just incredible. People looked at this face from thousands of years ago, and they didn't see some dusty historical artifact. They saw their neighbor, the doorman at their building, a guy from their family. The comments were amazing. Things like, "I swear there's a guy who looks just like this on my street," or simply, "Egyptians never change." It's this incredible moment of recognition, right? A connection that just zaps across millennia.
So, in the end, science gave the screaming woman something she hadn't had for 3,500 years: peace. It replaced that look of agony with a human presence. And it leaves us with one last thought to chew on. When we use all this incredible technology to look into the faces of the past, are we really seeing a stranger, or are we somehow just seeing ourselves?